Order. I call Jen Craft to move the motion.
Thank you. I beg to move that this House has considered Disability History Month. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Mark, and I'm grateful to the members of the Backbench Business Committee for allowing time for this important and timely debate. As a disabled woman and mother to a disabled daughter, I feel real personal pride in leading this debate today, and I'm grateful for the honourable members who have turned up to take part. It is an opportunity to reflect on the important place that disability and disabled people have in our history, to raise awareness of the ongoing challenges that people living with a disability face, and look forward to continuing to build a truly inclusive society. Disability History Month is a chance to celebrate our achievements to make the UK more inclusive to disabled people. A huge amount has already been achieved since the end of World War II, when over 300,000 servicemen and women came home disabled. That homecoming exposed huge numbers of people in Britain to the realities of life with a disability, acting as a catalyst for an important change in attitudes towards disabled people. The country saw changes to the law to improve disabled people's standards of living and work. The 1944 Disability Employment Act promised sheltered employment, reserved occupations and employment quotas for disabled people. Initiatives to restore the fitness and morale of disabled servicemen and women spread to the rest of the disabled population. The NHS extended rehabilitation services to workers disabled by industrial accidents, for example. Many disability rights charities formed in the 1940s and 50s, and in 1951, a new social movement was started by a silent reproach march of 800 disabled ex-servicemen walking to Downing Street. The civil rights movement in America inspired disabled groups to take direct action against discrimination, poor access and inequality. A social rather than a medical model of disability emerged. In the years since then, we have seen increased understanding of disabled people's experiences. The Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act of 1970, the first in the world to recognise and give rights to disabled people, created support services for disability, specialist educational facilities and introduced the Blue Badge Scheme. 1995 saw the implementation of the Disability Discrimination Act in the UK. The Act made it unlawful to discriminate against disabled people in employment, the provision of goods or services, education and transport. And the Equality Act, passed under the last Labour government in 2010, made disability a protected characteristic in law, strengthening measures of the 1995 Act and safeguarding disabled people from direct and indirect discrimination. Disabled campaigners who refused to accept a status quo where their experiences and lives were valued less than others in society were at the heart of these changes, as they are at the heart of calls for change today. I want to mention just one of these campaigners. Ruth Bashall, who passed away earlier this year, co-founded the Campaign for Accessible Transport in 1989, taking part in direct action protests that saw wheelchair users block central London streets. Ruth also set up Stay Safe East, a user-led organisation dedicated to tackling abuse against disabled people from diverse communities. Today, the group provides advice and advocacy for victims of violence and harassment, while working to improve the knowledge and practices of the police, health professionals and others as they interact with disabled people. If we are to honour that work, we must listen to organisations like Stay Safe East when they tell us what changes are needed to ensure that disabled people can access the opportunities for self-empowerment and self-agency that we all want. And we must listen to the new generation of activists, including the young people I met last week at an event in Parliament organised by Scope, who are sharing the challenges they've faced. Storytellers like these will be a key part of the journey to equality. Because it is a journey, and it is one that we are still on. An average of 1 in 3 disabled people say the UK is a worse place to live than a decade ago. Discrimination and stigma have not gone away, with 3 out of 4 disabled people having experienced negative attitudes or behaviour in the last 5 years. And disabled children are too frequently deprived the life chances they deserve with an SEND system that is broken after 14 years of neglect. The theme of this year's Disability History Month is livelihood and employment, an area which sadly illustrates these ongoing barriers well. The disability employment gap has sat stubbornly at around 30% for over a decade, and behind every statistic is an individual denied the independence and security that comes with a job. According to research by Scope, there are more than 1 million disabled people who want to work, but poor employer attitudes, insufficient employment support programmes, and a lack of flexibility and adjustments at work make it impossible. 2/3 of disabled people said the most common issue when applying for jobs was a fear of disclosing disability. And for disabled people who are supported into work, they are more likely to find themselves in lower paid roles or on a 0-hour contract. The disability pay gap stands at around 17%. This equates to a disabled person working on average unpaid for 54 days a year. 54 days. This exclusion and discrimination in employment has devastating knock-on effects for a disabled person's livelihood and well-being. We know the benefits that good employment brings: better incomes, financial stability, security, and a greater sense of purpose. Whereas disabled people out of employment suffer high levels of anxiety and lower rates of personal well-being. And the bottom line is the financial impact, as disabled households need on average an additional £1,010 a month to have the same standard of living as non-disabled households. And all of this is against the backdrop of the number of vacancies in the UK standing at around 831,000. By failing to recruit disabled people and support disabled employees to stay in their jobs, employers are missing out on a wealth of talent and the benefits of a diverse workforce. I want to look at some of the causes of this gap, because it is an untenable situation. In 2023, the APPG on eye health and visual impairment commissioned YouGov to carry out polling to look at employer attitudes towards partially sighted or blind people. The polling found that 48% of employers said they did not have accessible recruitment processes, and more shockingly, around a quarter said they would not be willing to make workplace adjustments to employ someone blind or partially sighted. Among the recommendations the APPG published as part of their report following the poll was that the government should review the Equality Act to ensure that it is fit for the modern labour market and ensure that employers comply with their existing obligations under the Equality Act. I'd welcome the Minister's views on how he can work to make this happen, taking into account the views and the voices of disabled people. Yet with proper support, disabled people can thrive in the workplace. There are organisations across the country that are demonstrating this, doing fantastic work to support disabled people to fulfil their career ambitions and potential. Last week I met Charlie, who had experienced sight loss since birth and found employment through Scope's Support to Work service. He spoke about how the employment advisor encouraged him to talk about his disability in a positive factor at interview, building his confidence to apply for jobs. He has now been in work for 5 years. The WorkFit scheme, run by the Down Syndrome Association, promotes the skills and abilities of people who have Down syndrome, focusing on the positive contribution they can make in the workplace. It is guided by the belief that in the right job and with the right support, everyone is able to work. Engaging directly with both employers and candidates to provide training and advice, the scheme has supported 1,000 candidates into employment with more than 750 employers. The scheme has created lasting change, with 9 out of 10 people in paid work through WorkFit having retained their jobs. And in my constituency of Thurrock Lifestyle Solutions is an excellent example of good practice in helping disabled people enter and stay in the workplace. It is particularly successful because it embodies the maxim, "Nothing about us without us," as it is run by, led by and designed by disabled people themselves. And it is that maxim that must guide government policy on disability. For too long, disabled people have been sidelined in policy-making process, denied a voice while successive policy agendas on areas like employment, education and transport have ignored their needs and left them to suffer the consequences as a result. I'm encouraged by the steps this Labour government is taking to put disabled voices at the heart of decision-making, and I know that the Minister is deeply engaged with these issues, and I thank him for his commitment. The creation of a disability lead in every government department is a very welcome step. It recognises the need to look at the experiences of disabled people through a cross-government approach to truly understand the full societal impact of living with a disability. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could confirm that the Government will continue engaging and working alongside disabled individuals, campaigners and charities as they seek to drive reform, and if he's able to give further details of the roles and responsibilities of the departmental disability leads. I also welcome the Government's white paper on getting Britain working, particularly the pledge to put disabled people at the heart of design and delivery. And I look forward to the review into the role of employers in promoting health and inclusive workplaces to support the recruitment and retention of those with a disability. I would like to recognise the important recognition in the white paper that the current system focuses on assessing capacity to work rather than helping people adapt to their health condition. The paper also acknowledges that too many people who would like to work are held back through fear of losing social security payments if they end up needing them again in the future. I hope that the Minister will assure me today that this will not be forgotten. Disabled people need to know that support will be there when they need it, and if for whatever reason, having tried employment, that particular workplace doesn't work out, they will not lose their financial benefits as a result. And can the Minister reassure me that the Green Paper, due to be published next spring, will not see a return to punitive measures or an assessment system so restrictive it is in fact punitive? To truly deliver the huge shift we need to see more disabled people in secure employment. We must look at these issues in the round. It starts with fixing the broken SEND system for our children, and it will take sustained long-term focus on the experiences of disabled children and their families to deliver an education system that meets the need of every child. The extra £740 million of investment to increase places for pupils with SEND in mainstream schools is a significant step. Because in education, employment and across government, policy that gets it right for disabled people gets it right for everyone. And finally, while progress has been made, and we should celebrate that and reflect with gratitude on the work of disabled campaigners who have brought us so far, there is still so much to be done. Not only in the realms of employment and livelihood, but also in accessible transport, accessible public, social and sports spaces, and ensuring that there is no place in society where disabled people aren't rightly able to play their part. So one final question to the Minister. When he chairs the meetings of the Government's disability leads, will he work to ensure that the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, the Department for Transport, the Department for Business and Trade and the Office for Equality and Opportunity are all working together to speed up progress to make the UK a truly inclusive place for the millions of disabled people who live here?
Thank you. May I remind members that they should bob, as some of you are doing, if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered Disability History Month, and I call the first speaker, Jim Shannon.
Mr Chairman, and first of all, can I commend the Honourable Lady Thurrock for setting the scene so very well and a subject matter which we're all engaged with every day in our constituency, first of all. But secondly, the importance is, I believe, I think we probably all believe it, we should encourage those who want to work, wish to work, and maybe haven't had the opportunity to do so. And this debate today is, I believe, an opportunity to do just that. They highlighted, raise awareness, and to encourage my constituents back home, who I'll speak about just now. Obviously, in these debates for Mark, I always try to give a Northern Ireland perspective to a debate that is a UK of United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland debate, because it's that sort of a debate, and the Minister's here to hopefully answer some of those questions that we will pose to him. The most recent census, indeed it's a season to talk about a census after all. This one was in 2021 and showed that 1 person in 4, 24.3%, some 463,000 people in Northern Ireland had a limiting long-term health problem or disability, 40% of which were aged 65 or more. That was some 185,300 people. Stats and figures sometimes blind people, they sort of go over their heads, but really if you think about that, that's 185,000 people, it's 185,000 families. The impact is great, and a population of 1.9 million in Northern Ireland. It's also interesting to note that the number of people with a limiting long-term health problem or disability increased from the 2011 to 21 census. Unfortunately, Sir Mark, a worrying trend as well. The increase from 374,600 people in 2011 to 463,000 people in 2021, increase of some 23.6%. Is notable, and so too must be the response to this. My question to the Minister will, as it always is, in relation to the role that the Right Honourable Gentleman plays here, has he had an opportunity yet in his new role as Minister to discuss these matters with the appropriate Minister back home at the Northern Ireland Assembly, just to make sure that we can cooperate better, number one, but number two, to ensure that that the policies or the strategy or the way of responding is one that's conformed right across this whole United Kingdom. Give an example of what we're doing, perhaps maybe back in my local council area. It's the Ards and North Down Council. They have a motion recently to ensure that signage was visible in council facilities, reminding people that not every disability is visible. It's one when you see that on the tube train. Whenever I travel in here, there's a wee poster where they have disability seats in the tubes, and they say not every disability is visible. And they're right. And people, by the way, in this age where everybody's hustling and bustling and rushing like they all are, it's interesting many times that people will give up their seat to someone who maybe unknowingly has something, maybe a disability, and their pride sometimes prevents them from taking that seat. But the fact is, people are kind. I think, Sir Mark, in this world we live in, this fast world, it's always good to remind ourselves of those people who can reach out and help, and it's very, very important to do so. So I thank my council for doing this and for ensuring that awareness is raised. I believe that this has, in its own small way, Sir Mark, had a real impact and change on the conversation around disability. The Honourable Lady is right today. This is a change of conversation we need as well. We want people to think about it. We want people to talk about it. We want to encourage people. So Honourable Lady deserves a lot of credit for bringing this forward today. As we teach or try to teach people to understand that what may be a healthy person at first glance can also be someone who needs a little more help or assistance. Sometimes anxiety, depression, PTSD crops up across my constituency all the time. To understand that will help us to understand why the numbers are not what we expect, and therefore we need to be ensuring that every disability is acknowledged, and we do all we can to ensure that every disabled person is heard. I think of this debate today, and it was in my mind in another debate we had the other day, but not specifically about this, but I was minded when I come here today about it. Our veterans, I think when you look at them and you see those who have lost limbs, be it legs, arm, or have had terrific internal injuries as well, and how they, through the Invictus Games, Sir Mark, through the Paralympics, where all those with disabilities have been able to shine, should remind us all, every one of us, should inspire us, and probably as well should humble us when we think of what those people can do and with that disability. And really for me, and I think for others in this House as well, the Invictus Games or the Paralympics have become something that you want to see even more, with great respect to those who are fully able-bodied, because you can see what their achievements and the goals that they can reach. So it's really important. This, I believe, is the main drive behind History Month. We can see where we started off by removing the workhouses or the institutions. The Honourable Leader referred to seeing soldiers returning from the war who could do more with help, and by acknowledging there was a functioning place in society, and that the real discovery was a society is it better for this inclusivity. I want to mention one last one in relation to my comments. And that's about our children as well. I have 6 grandchildren, Mr. Chairman. 3 of them have speech therapy issues. One of them is non-verbal. Again, it's another disability in our children. Already referred to children as well, and I think it's important that we have in place the institutions. It's a debate, not a debate about STEM education, by the way. It's a debate about disabilities. So I want to focus on that if I can, just for one brief thing. Now, he might be non-verbal. One of them is non-verbal, but they have a smile and an interest in what happens around them. And so, education is very important to help those children achieve their goals in life, and I think that's important. I've also seen firsthand how many steps can be taken forward onto the expert help and support that is available. The question posed to us in this place is, do we have enough help and support available for the massive spectrum of disability? As my wife often calls it, and obviously a very wise lady and a very sensible lady that she married me, by the way. More sensible that she's still with me, by the way, but that's by the way. Can I just say, she refers to difficulties as diffability, a different kind of ability. I conclude with this. We could do more to support parents and help them to unlock the potential of their child. We can do more to ensure that mainstream schools have capacity and finance to be a safe and engaging place to learn with no child left behind. We can do more to support getting people into the workforce by supporting them and helping workforces to afford and make the changes to disability friendly. We can do more to ensure there's affordable, suitable, growing families. And lastly, we can do more with our ageing to ensure that they have the enhanced support and the care to remain at home as long as they have a wish to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I call Sarah Coombs.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Mark. I thank my friend, the member for Thurrock, for bringing forward this debate, during which we can reflect on the treatment of disabled people in the past and how we can learn from the experience of our constituents to shape a better future. As we focus on this year's theme of disability, livelihood and employment, the optimists among us like to think that the arc of history tends towards progress. We've heard about the important 1944 and 1970 Acts and the fact that 2010 was a landmark year in disability history with the introduction of the Equality Act. Prohibiting discrimination against disabled people, it is still one of the most progressive and long-standing legacies of the previous Labour government. Unfortunately, in 2024, after 14 years of Conservative government, it feels like we're going backwards. The UN's Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities found in March this year that we have a system that devalues disabled people and that results in hate speech and hostility towards them. A fragmented, inaccessible system that undermines human dignity is not one that this Labour government stands for. Today, the disability employment gap, the difference in the employment rate of disabled people and non-disabled people, stands at around 25 percentage points in West Bromwich. That is slightly less than the national average, but it is still far too large. That's why I'm pleased that the government is addressing this disparity and listening to disabled people in the question of how to do it. It's clear that the employment support system for disabled people is not working properly, which is why the government's recent white paper has a focus on enabling disabled people to find long-term and, as my honourable friend said, well-paid work and thrive in it. And I'm glad that the government is investing £115 million next year to deliver the Connect to Work, a new supported employment programme matching disabled people with job vacancies. From 2026, the hope is this will support nearly 100,000 people a year, and I can think of many very qualified disabled people in my own constituency who don't have the jobs that they deserve and they would do really well in. At the budget, the government also addressed an issue that affects many disabled people, the carers allowance. The previous cap was trapping people in poverty and penalising them like criminals for earning a few pounds over the threshold. We've raised the earning limit on carers allowance, meaning that it's easier for people who are caring for loved ones, many of whom are disabled, to go out and work. We should be clear, though, about the scale of the challenge that many disabled people come up against when looking for work and just going about their daily lives. Whether it's social barriers presented by other people's perceptions of their disability, or whether it's physical barriers presented by public transport, like my honourable friend mentioned. On average, disabled people are more likely to rely on buses to get around. Unfortunately, our bus system is just not good enough, something the new government is doing something about, and I hope the Minister might mention in his remarks. The 45 bus service from West Brom to Walsall, which I campaigned to save, is still, unfortunately, so unreliable that it often leaves passengers stranded or forced to abandon their journeys. The loss of the 46 bus now means that elderly and disabled people on Old Walsall Road have to navigate an enormous hill. And the fact that there's no direct buses to the train station from Oakham means that many residents find it hard to work further afield, go shopping in the city centre, or take part in sport. And I touch on sport, as other members have, because where progress has been made, then it's worth mentioning. Of course, we've got a long way to go to make sure all sport is accessible, but I'd like to pay tribute to a few people in my area. In West Brom, we are proud that our local football club is famous up and down the land. But there's one part of the club that's not so widely known. West Bromwich Albion are the reigning champions of at least one league, the National League Premiership for Power Chair Football. Their goalkeeper and player manager, Chris Gordon, who has spinal muscular atrophy, has a career and a livelihood that is centred around sport, not despite his disability, but because of it. Another local champion of sporting opportunities for people with disabilities and learning disabilities was Norma Hyde from neighbouring Halesowen. In 1983, she set up Special Olympics Sandwell, and this year she was rightly recognised for that in the King's Birthday Honours List. And finally, Blind Dave Healy, as he calls himself, is a local legend in West Brom. Losing his sight at a young age, he committed himself to fundraising through sport. He recently cycled 1,000 kilometres along the Western Front in Europe, and he once did 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents, the first and only blind person in the world to achieve this, and in the process he raised millions and millions of pounds. But of course, not every disabled person needs to be inspiring or needs to run marathons or be at the top of the league to deserve fulfilling employment, a decent livelihood and access to transport. And as parliamentarians, we must put the views and voices of disabled people at the heart of what we do and work towards a future that's truly inclusive for everyone. Thank you.
I call Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And it is a pleasure to contribute today to this important debate that's been brought by the Honourable Member for Thurrock, and I thank her for securing such an important debate. I think she has raised many important points already, some of which I will go on to mention. As has already been said, this year's UK Disability History Month theme is disability, livelihood and employment. My interest in this issue has its foundations in losing 70% of my hearing from bacterial meningitis, aged 19. Ironically, being the Member of Parliament for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, this is the first job where I feel my disability has been a positive advantage, giving me a platform to advocate for others. My niece was born with spinal muscular atrophy, and this has given me a window into the experience of more acute disability in the workplace and the challenges she faces on a daily basis. In 1995, it was a Conservative government under John Major which delivered the first UK legislation to protect disabled people from various forms of discrimination. And in the last 30 years, new protections have improved the work situation of disabled people. A good example of this has been the Access to Work scheme, which, if implemented and understood properly by business, can remove some of the barriers employers may perceive in taking on a disabled employee. Many disabled people are eager to work and contribute, but face significant barriers in understanding what opportunities are truly accessible to them. Whilst there is a lot of emphasis on getting disabled people into further education, that same support is not prevalent when they look beyond university. Many disabled people want to work, to contribute to society, pay taxes, and have a work routine that makes them feel valued. Time should be taken to not only understand what is possible, but also what that individual is aspiring to achieve. Managing a disability can feel like a full-time job in itself. To enable disabled people to contribute to our society through work, we need systems that offer flexibility, that safeguard benefits, and allow individuals to take on work without jeopardising their health or their financial stability. A manager saying, "Tell me what you need and I'll do it," is a great start. But the reality is, in a new job, there are so many unknowns, and for those with additional access needs, this can be hard to define at the outset without prior knowledge of exactly what the job entails. Those needs can vary widely depending on the disability. There's an opportunity to create transformational change quickly. If we increase the prevalence of access coordinators, they can provide an interface between businesses, line managers, and disabled employees and job seekers. Their role is to implement best practice from other organisations and identify the help which is available. Supporting a disabled employee's career progression, which can be even more challenging with geographic and access constraints. These roles can help deliver the autonomy and the flexibility which works for both employer and employee, ultimately ensuring that disabled employees have access to a career, not just a job.
I call Catherine Atkinson.
And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I wish to also thank and congratulate my friend for Thurrock for securing this debate. Derby has the largest number of deaf people outside of London, and I'm sure that that is in no small part because we are privileged to have the Royal Deaf School in Derby. Now, this specialist school was founded in 1894 by Dr. William Rowe after he witnessed a young deaf man being bullied and called Dumb Jack. Dr. Rowe was struck by the social and educational exclusion of deaf people. And I want to pay tribute to him and the school he created this Disability History Month. There is no doubt that attitudes across society towards people who are deaf or have hearing loss have come a long way. The country was mesmerised when Rose Ayling-Ellis waltzed her way to lifting the glitter ball trophy on Strictly Come Dancing, providing an overdue weekly prime-time lesson on deaf awareness and deaf culture for the nation. And films such as Silent Child and Coda have not just showcased the rich talent that exists within the deaf community, but used stories and humour to give wider society an insight into the deaf existence and the barriers people face on a daily basis. The media representation of the deaf community has certainly and rightfully grown in recent years, whether through deaf participation in Love Island or Bake Off or Married at First Sight, or simple acts of inclusion in everyday interactions. But people who are deaf or have hearing loss are still marginalised in society, and there is still so much to do to provide the community with the life chances they deserve. Children and young people from across our country attend the Royal School for the Deaf in Derby, which offers day and residential specialist education. And last week, the Ofsted inspection on its residential provision was published and was outstanding in all areas. And I would invite the Minister, if I may, to join me in congratulating them. The Royal Deaf School also is the largest employer in the Midlands for deaf BSL users, giving incredible role models to their pupils. And they provide training and development to partner agencies in Derbyshire and Derby. And just one example, which was mentioned in the Ofsted report, was that a firefighter who they trained was able to use sign language in an emergency, providing support and reassurance to an individual involved in a road traffic collision. I was also able to see art by its pupils that was shown in an exhibition alongside work by renowned deaf photographer Stephen Iliff at the Art Core Gallery in Derby, celebrating the achievements of the deaf community, highlighting the diverse experiences and careers of deaf people and demonstrating that with the right support, there are no limits to what they can accomplish. However, we know that our wider education system across the country far too frequently fails our children and young people. The attainment gap facing deaf pupils is equivalent to 12 months of learning by the end of primary school. And at GCSE, deaf students perform over a whole grade worse in each of English and maths than their non-deaf peers. And people who are deaf or have hearing loss are penalised in the labour market. Less than 4 in 10 working-age people who use BSL as their first language are in employment. A third of this group are classified as long-term economically inactive, a total waste of their talents and ability, a point powerfully made by my honourable friend for Thurrock and my honourable friend for West Bromwich. And sadly, there are also far too many examples in the NHS where it is not doing enough to provide appropriate access. 2 in 3 people who use BSL as their first language have no accessible method of contacting their GP. 4 in 5 patients who are deaf or have hearing loss reported having an appointment when their communication needs were unmet. And deaf people suffer worse outcomes for physical and mental health than their peers. These are public policy failures. And as MPs and decision makers in Westminster, we need to take action to fix them. And there are many brilliant charities providing evidence and expertise to feed into that work. And we had 4 of them in Parliament very recently at an event that I hosted that we were honoured to have the Minister for Disabled People attend and speak. The British Deaf Association, the National Deaf Children's Society, the RNID, the Royal National Institute for Deafness, and Sign Health. And they can act as a bridge to their communities, helping to facilitate policymakers to learn directly from the lived experience of the communities themselves. And the work that we need to do in Westminster to support the deaf community cuts across government. And we need action from all the government departments: health, education, transport, Home Office, business and trade, work and pensions, and others. And I wish to thank and congratulate the Minister for Disabled People on the positive step forward that we have seen with the appointment of lead ministers in each department to champion disability inclusion and accessibility. And in his cross-government role, I am sure that the Minister will passionately drive the policies that we need to see in the lives of deaf and disabled people so that they can thrive and that we can all benefit from the full use of their talents and skills.
Thank you. I call Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Sir Mark. And may I begin by congratulating the Honourable Lady for Thurrock for securing the debate and leading it with such a wealth of knowledge and experience. I think we all benefited greatly from her presentation. It's also a slightly unusual debate because it's the first one that I can recall in recent times where the splendid Honourable Member for Strangford was the first backbencher to be called. That's a little bit of an in-joke, but most people familiar with his wonderful contributions, but very frequent ones, will understand what I mean. I was encouraged to take part in this debate by the fine example of the Honourable Lady for Battersea, who chairs the APPG for eye health and visual impairment. And I know she's very disappointed she can't be here today, but I understand that there's a visitation in her constituency of the sort that no MP can refuse to attend. But I should like to record my gratitude to her pleasant and dedicated team for supplying me with some very helpful information which I now intend to deploy. Now, according to the charity Scope, there are well over 16,000 people living with a disability in my constituency of New Forest East. And I should like to say a few words to honour their efforts to work and live well despite the challenges that they face. Disability History Month is now an annual event celebrating the history, contributions and struggles of disabled people, and a motion that marked the first Disability History Month was tabled in the Commons in November 2010, signed by 79 honourable and right honourable members, including the former father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley, and my late great friend Sir David Amis. Among other things, the motion called upon schools, colleges, universities, local authorities, employers, the public and the media to recognise and celebrate UK Disability History Month and encourage them to campaign to improve the then unequal and still sadly unequal position of disabled people in society by working towards greater equality and inclusion. That call has certainly been taken up by a good number of people and organisations, and I am particularly lucky to have in my constituency the Minstead Trust, which works to support people with learning disabilities. It's no exaggeration to say that it's a jewel in the crown of the New Forest. And I was very interested in some of the earlier comments by honourable members about the importance of the work ethic for disabled people, because the Minstead Trust acquired the wonderful Hanger Farm Arts Centre, which is a terrific facility with a tremendous programme of visiting artists and performers, and it also gives opportunities to work experience to the people who benefit directly from the trust, and it's also an outlet for some of the goods which they manufacture under the auspices of the trust, and it's a terrific facility for the community as well. So big wins all around from that wonderful project. Long may it continue. Another thing that trust does is to encourage workplaces to be inclusive in their recruitment practices so that they can enjoy the benefits that people with learning disabilities can bring to the businesses that take them on. And that's important because, as we've heard already, UK Disability History Month's theme this year is indeed livelihood and employment. We know that there are all types of benefits to working, including social benefits. Doing something you enjoy can quell loneliness, create important social bonds, and give one a sense of purpose. The benefits of including disabled people in our workplaces really are enormous. And there are many other realms where inclusion, however, could be better. The former Minister of State for the Department for Work and Pension, my honourable friend for East Grinstead and Uckfield, understood this. She led the Disability Champions work across government, where each Department of State had one minister who was a disability champion with a personal commitment to championing accessibility and opportunity for disabled people within their department's policies. The Ministerial Disability Champions met regularly to discuss plans such as the Disability Action Plan, as well as the impact of the high cost of living on disabled people. And I'm certainly pleased that the new government is continuing in the same vein with its disability leads in each government department. Now, that same former minister also recognised that some disabled people have significant extra costs relating to expensive equipment, home adaptations and so forth, and they need in order to get by. The previous Conservative government did provide a substantial cost of living support package. Nevertheless, according to the charity Scope, the disability price tag, which is the extra money needed by a disabled household to have the same standard of living as a non-disabled household in my constituency, is well over £900. We all know it's not just extra financial costs that the disabled people face. Almost 3/4 of disabled people in my constituency are estimated to have experienced negative attitudes, while a great many people in local schools, health providers, businesses and community centres are knowledgeable and respectful of the challenges faced by the disabled community. It is also true that when we look at the national picture, outdated attitudes towards disabled people are sometimes spilling over into harassment and abuse. Disabled people are more likely to be the victims of crime and twice as likely to experience harassment than non-disabled people. We know that disabled women are more than 3 times as likely to experience domestic abuse. I'm sure that all honourable and right honourable members will be united on the need to end this, and I look forward to seeing what the Minister will be doing to work with his colleagues to ensure that the police and other services take a comprehensive and informed view when tackling abuse against disabled people. It isn't a simple subject. Victims of disability hate crime or discrimination or sexual violence can have their experiences compounded because of the double or triple discrimination that they face as women or as people of colour or for some other particular identifying factor. But there are charities led by disabled people who can provide expert advice and information about how better to support disabled people who are at risk of harm, and I hope the Minister may be able to say something about how his government will work with such specialist charities. I would like to just say a personal word of tribute to those of our colleagues, members of Parliament, who are themselves living with disabilities. And it was significant to hear my honourable friend for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton explaining the extra burden to the normal burdens of being an assiduous member of Parliament her hearing loss has caused. I said at the beginning that I was encouraged to take part by the honourable lady, who I regard as a personal friend, the member for Battersea. I find the way she copes with her eye disability absolutely inspiring. And I speak from a little personal knowledge because when I was an undergraduate, I lost 18 months after a severe allergic reaction to some eye drops, which prevented my being able to read, which when you're a student at university is a bit of a problem. And I remember once, actually, as it happened, before I even knew that this would come right in the end, as it finally did, walking past the palace... Oh,
to get this, all the speakers in.
Walking past the Palace of Westminster and thinking ruefully to myself, and to think I thought I would ever get to be a Member of Parliament. Well, I got over that problem and I did get to be a Member of Parliament, but I take off my hat to those MPs with far worse disabilities, permanent disabilities, who nevertheless have joined this place and contribute so much to its proceedings.
Thank you. I'll call Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and it's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. So, as many people know, I'm an ENT surgeon with a special interest in hearing loss and ear diseases. That has really been my life's work, and so I declare an interest in this subject, a big interest. So, as we've heard, deafness and hearing loss are actually invisible disabilities. But deafness and hearing loss are common, very, very common. 70% of people over the age of 70 and 40% of people over the age of 40. Now, hearing aids are free on the NHS, but millions of people who could benefit from them don't have one. And many people who do have one simply don't use it. Perhaps 5 million people. Perhaps 1 million of our fellow citizens simply cannot hear conversational speech. So many of them are unable to contact their GP or use health services. Now, many deaf people don't work because the adjustments which could and should be made for them are simply not made. Deaf awareness amongst employers is simply insufficient. Now let me talk a little about earwax. Occluding earwax, which causes hearing loss and is also caused by hearing aid moulds, is a huge issue for deaf people. And the services in this country to remove it are very patchy. Before I became an MP, I was the chair of a deaf association in East Anglia, a charity helping thousands of deaf people with contracts from the NHS to provide ear care and hearing aids. And I believe that's a model of the community-based, not-for-profit NHS ear care to the population which could be widely copied. The charity has mobile services for rural locations and is able to provide ear care in residential settings, one stop for wax removal, audiology, hearing aid provision, keeping people communicating, connecting and able to work. I'd like to commend the work of the many excellent larger charities, some of whom were here in Parliament this week, set up to help people with hearing loss. Now, the RNID estimates that the cost to the economy of hearing loss is £30 billion due to loss of earnings, reduced quality of life and increased social care costs. Yet the solution to much of this is obvious. And hearing aids must be just about the most useful disability aids ever invented. So let's do what we can from this Parliament to support our NHS audiology and hearing aid services, because after all, most of us will need them one day. Let's not ignore deafness when we talk about disability. As I read about a young person with hearing loss who said, one of the worst things is when people say something I miss is, oh, it doesn't matter. Now, it probably didn't matter to them at the time, but it makes me feel that I didn't matter. Now, I think that matters to all of us.
Okay, we move now to the front bench contributions. I call Ollie Glover for the Lib Dems.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I start by paying tribute to the Honourable Member for Thurrock for securing this debate. Her speech covered a lot of ground, in particularly a warm tribute to campaigners in her constituency and beyond. And she told the story of the journey in progress on disability rights and equality with great eloquence. And I remember her speaking with passion on this subject at her maiden speech also. She also spoke more of the need to promote access to equality and cited examples of how positive change in the workplace can be achieved through the right supportive schemes. She also, as did other speakers, cited the importance of links to education and transport and reminds us that this issue cuts across all aspects of government and society. And she was quite right to call on the government to focus on support and positive action rather than sanctions and punishment. The Honourable Member for Strangford talked of the importance of supporting and encouraging people into work and the Northern Ireland context, and quite rightly reminded us that not all disabilities are visible. Whilst the member for West Bromwich talked of the importance of support for carers and high-quality transport to enable people to access society equally. The Honourable Member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton was quite right to cite the Conservative government's contribution in 1995 through the Disability Discrimination Act. And hopefully this is something that we can all work on together across the House to make sure that we continue to reduce and ultimately end discrimination against disabled people, including in the workplace. We must do far more to tackle barriers to work, including by providing more support for employers to change the way they view disability. In the Liberal Democrat Manifesto, we made a commitment to make the benefit system work better for disabled people by giving them and organisations that represent them a stronger voice in the design of benefit policies and processes. We would like to see work capability assessments brought in-house and personal independence payment assessments reformed to make the process more transparent and to stop unnecessary reassessments and ending the use of informal assessments. We would also like to empower more people to enter the job market, including parents, carers and disabled people themselves, by making more use of technology and new ways of working. We welcome the government's long-term ambition to achieve an 80% employment rate and a number of measures in its Get Britain Working white paper published last month. Under the Conservative government, the UK was the only economy to see its employment rate fall over the last 5 years. And the Conservatives undermined apprenticeships, left mental health services not fit for purpose, and ran our NHS into the ground. We welcome proposed steps by the government to improve access to skills, training and education and to reduce shockingly high mental health waiting lists. But we call on the government to go further. On mental health, we would like to see regular mental health check-ups available and new mental health hubs in all communities. We would like to see more done on better flexible working, given that 52% of carers who apply for flexible working have their applications refused. The government should guarantee apprentices are paid at least the national minimum wage by scrapping the lower apprentice rate. And we note with concern that disability charities such as Disability Rights UK do have some concern about the balance between positive supportive measures being proposed and potential sanctions and punishment in forthcoming legislation. We've heard from many honourable members of the importance of local charities and particular constituency circumstances. In my Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage, over 12,000 households have at least one disabled person, which represents nearly 28% of all households in the constituency. Thankfully, local authorities and charities work together to help to provide assistance to people. Oxfordshire County Council runs a service known as the Community Support Service, which runs activities and services to help people stay healthy, independent and engaged. Towns in my constituency, Wantage and Wallingford, host this service. As the years have moved on, in Wantage, the service has adapted to meet the changing social care needs of the area. Wantage Market Garden was created in the green space behind the service and is now looked after by the community action group Sustainable Wantage in partnership with care provider Styleacre and the County Council. Services like these are vital for inclusion and support of disabled people. We know that on average disabled people take far fewer trips per year than non-disabled people, which is why in addition to improving bus and rail services, community transport services such as Vale Community Impact, Chelsea Volunteers, Didcot Volunteer Drivers and Wallingford Volunteer Drivers are such an important lifeline, and I'm proud to see that Oxfordshire County Council has awarded over £100,000 worth of grants to these organisations. In my constituency, most of our railway stations have seen accessibility improvements in recent times, but Chelsea is the busiest that currently lacks them, and I call on Network Rail and Great Western Railway and the government to support an accessibility scheme at that station. We've heard from honourable members in Derby North and Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket of the importance of helping people with hearing loss and the support that that provides. And at the risk of oversharing, so Mark, I also am afflicted by occasional earwax problems, so I can certainly recognise that one. And perhaps I shall turn to the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket for advice on how to deal with that vexing problem. In conclusion, we must do more to support those with additional needs. I hear regularly from my constituents how accessing the support they need through PIP applications is challenging to say the least. Supporting employers to make reasonable adjustments for employees through schemes like Access to Work. And as the Honourable Member for Strangford said, supporting children with special educational needs so they can thrive in their education, and more funding for CAMS, the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service. I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say.
Okay, thank you. May I now call the official opposition spokesperson, Helen Whately.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And congratulations to the Honourable Member for Thurrock for securing this debate during Disability History Month. As someone with a disability herself, she will likely know that everyday life with a disability can be so much harder for someone with a disability than for those of us fortunate to be able to take our health more or less for granted. Before I was elected to Parliament, I had an inspirational colleague who had suffered a spinal injury which left her unable to walk. Our jobs were demanding, a 70-hour week was not uncommon, and somehow my colleague managed to do that and do it brilliantly despite all the extra challenges of life in a wheelchair, the difficulty of getting to and from work, navigating inaccessible buildings, all the extra effort to do the everyday things that so many of us do without thinking, like getting dressed, taking a shower, and working alongside her made me realise the importance of the things that we have done to help disabled people over the years, like making buildings and transport more accessible. I also saw the consequences of people failing to give any thought to those needs, like using disabled toilets as storage cupboards, or leaving them locked, so that you had to go on a mission to find the key, a mission that was made doubly hard for someone in a wheelchair. My colleague's disability was obvious, but we should be sure to remember people whose disabilities are hidden and not underestimate the difficulty that those can add to life. For instance, my honourable friend for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, who said with great insight that this job is the first time her hearing loss has felt like an advantage, as she uses her platform as an MP to advocate for others. And she argued powerfully for disabled people to be able to access not just a job, but a career. Alongside talking about the challenges, this Disability History Month is a chance to reflect on pivotal moments of progress for disabled people and celebrate the individuals, heroes, who've picked up this cause and made the running, metaphorically and even sometimes in practice. If we cast our minds back, for instance, to the summer of 2012, right here in London, the international bar was raised and a new standard set for what disabled people could imagine achieving. Over 4,000 para-athletes from 164 countries competed with everything they had to give in front of a physical audience of 2.7 million people and watched on 3.8 billion television screens around the world, record-breaking audiences and a record number of young people who might be growing up with a disability but waking up each day and thinking, if I put my mind to it, that could be me. That was a moment where in this country we made a leap forwards, and as we did so, we led the world. And the message is one that is repeated at every Paralympic Games: never underestimate what someone with a disability can do. Which brings me to disability employment. Government should recognise the challenges disabled people face, but it must not dissuade anyone of their ability to overcome them. On the contrary, it must lean into the barriers to employment and help knock them aside. On this, my party has a strong track record. As a new backbencher, I remember being encouraged by a passionate disabilities minister at the time, Justin Tomlinson, to get involved in our Disability Confident programme, to get employers across the country to think differently about disabilities. In 2017, we set a target to get 1 million more disabled people into work by 2027. We met that target 5 years early. There are now 5.5 million disabled people in work, and we took practical steps to achieve that, working with employers, as I mentioned, funding access to work, which helps over 67,000 people in 2023-24, launching universal support to give personalised support to long-term sick and disabled people to find and stay in work, and providing supported internships for people with special educational needs, to give just a few examples. I'm a firm believer that work is the best way to improve your standard of living, as well as giving you the chance of the satisfaction of a job well done. A view I'm sure I share with many, if not all, honourable members here, and also argued for compellingly by my honourable friend for New Forest East a moment ago in his extremely well-informed speech. The question is not whether someone can work, it's what work can they do, and indeed how. If a person with disabilities needs help to work, where does that come from? Often family, community, charities, which honourable members have referred to today, who often have deep expertise, volunteers who give of their time and compassion, and, as I have set out, the government. But the resources of government must be targeted. Since the pandemic, we all know that the number of people economically inactive due to ill health has surged, reaching 2.8 million people. Quite apart from the cost of this, it's a waste of talent and potential. That's why in government we embarked on reforms to help people stay in work or get back to work. Reforms to fit notes, the launch of Workwell, the launch of universal support, and our work with employers. And we were reforming welfare to make sure financial incentives didn't get in the way of work. I welcome the government taking forwards many of these reforms, but I do believe that they have made a grave error in kicking the can down the road on the accompanying benefit reforms. Every day someone who could work is instead on benefits. That is money that could be helping the disabled person live their life to the full. So, Mark, as I conclude, I will return to history, given the topic of the debate. The 1944 Disability Employment Act, introduced at the end of the Second World War, laid the path for disability legislation and protections for the next 80 years. The 1944 Act was, as the Honourable Member said, a response to the Second World War. We live in a different era, but our welfare system is built on the vision of our predecessors, determined to make sure soldiers wounded defending our freedom would be supported on their return home. When we were in government, we put our shoulder to the wheel of making our welfare system fit for the 21st century. We made progress, but I am absolutely clear that there is much more to do. In fact, every honourable member who has spoken today has made important suggestions. So this Disability History Month is a chance to send an emphatic message of encouragement to people with disabilities across the whole United Kingdom. We know how hard every day can be, but let there be no limits to what you can achieve.
Okay, thank you. I now call the Minister, Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark. I'm delighted to be serving under your chairmanship, and I also want to congratulate my honourable friend on initiating this debate and on her speech in doing so. We've been reminded that Disability History Month was inaugurated, I think, with an early day motion in this House in 2010, with our former colleague Dame Anne Begg, herself a wheelchair user, as the lead signatory. And it is an opportunity for us to reflect on progress made, on challenges that we still face, and to gather together the voices calling rightly for a more inclusive society. We want to celebrate the achievements of disabled people throughout history and to recognise the barriers they've overcome, including those that persist. And I agree with the Honourable Member for New Forest East that the examples of those past and present who serve in this House with a disability are inspiring. I didn't know that he'd had a period at university without sight. I think he does know. I'm familiar with some of his university activities, but I wasn't with that one. So it was very interesting to hear about that. Understanding history does help us to learn and grow as a society, Sir Mark. And in this month, in honouring the pioneers of disability rights and listening to the experiences of disabled people, committing to work together for a more inclusive future. And I want to set out the government's actions to deliver access and inclusion to all disabled people through our missions and our plans for a decade of national renewal ahead. My honourable friend highlighted the stubborn disability employment gap, which, as she said, has been stuck at 30 percentage points across the country for the last 30 years. I was pleased to hear in West Bromwich it's slightly less, but it's still much too high, and we do need to make progress on this. So we want to provide better support to enable disabled people who are able to and who want to work to move into employment and to progress in employment. And I'm grateful for what honourable members have said about our Get Britain Working White Paper published a couple of weeks ago, which announced some very important reforms. We're changing the outcomes against which we measure success in this area, not focusing just on getting somebody into a job, but on achieving higher engagement with everyone, on the employment being sustained once it's been started, and on whether it leads to pay progression as well. We're going to overhaul job centres. We're going to deliver a new youth guarantee to make sure that nobody will be left on the scrap heap when they're young. And we want local Get Britain Working plans to be drawn up in every area in England, bringing together job centres, colleges and skills providers, the NHS, employers, local charities to tackle economic inactivity. And very importantly, I think, the White Paper announced a disability employment panel, which we will work with to make sure that the voices of disabled people are at the heart of the reforms that we introduce. I was very interested to hear from my honourable friend Thurrock about WorkFit, which she's mentioned to me previously, which I'm keen to find out more about. And it was very good to hear as well from the honourable member for New Forest East about the Minstead Trust and about Hanger Farm. And I think models like that are what we need to address the chronically low rate of employment at the moment amongst people with learning disabilities. My honourable friend from West Bromwich made the point rightly about public transport access to work. And, you know, I've spoken to a number of disabled people about the various barriers that they are to employment, and public transport accessibility is right at the top of the list of many of them. So I'm very pleased that the bus services bill will include measures to improve the accessibility of bus and coach stops, introducing powers to create statutory guidance on inclusive design, and that the Department for Transport is working very closely with disability advocacy groups, including the Department's own Disabled Persons Transport Advisory Committee. But there's certainly a lot of progress we may need to make in that particular area. We fully recognise that some people, through ill health or disability, will not be working. We are determined to make sure that they have the support they need as well. But we know that many of those who are out of work through ill health or disability would love to be in a job, but at the moment they face insuperable barriers which prevent them. And those barriers include, Sir Mark, features of the benefit system. We've got a benefit system at the moment in which the standard rate is at the lowest level in real terms for 40 years, making it very hard for those who receive it to support their families. But if they can convince my department that they are too sick to work, they receive additional cash, but then no help at all to return to work. So the benefit system itself is driving people with health problems into inactivity. So we're committed to reforming the system so that health and disability benefits support disabled people into work and to live independently. And alongside Get Britain Working, we will be setting out reform proposals in a green paper in the spring, to be followed by a full 12-week consultation, because we want to think about this properly and take account of everybody's views in getting this right. My honourable friend, in introducing the debate, also mentioned, as well as the disability employment gap, the disability pay gap, rightly. And we're working on that as well. We're developing the Equality, Race and Disability Bill to deliver our manifesto commitment to disability pay gap reporting for large employers, and to place the full right to equal pay for disabled people on the statute book. That work needs to be informed by the views of disabled people and the views of the employers who will implement the new requirements as well. So we'll launch a public consultation early in the new year, when we'll want to hear from disabled people, their representative organisations, and from employers to help shape the legislation. Since July, Sir Mark, I've been meeting regularly with a range of disability groups and organisations, and I've thoroughly enjoyed doing so. In the past week, I've met with the Disabled People's Organisations Forum England, which is made up of over 40 organisations led by disabled people. I've met with the Disability Charities Consortium, comprising 9 of the largest disability charities. The first of those meetings, I should say, was online. The second one was face-to-face. Also online, I've met with our regional stakeholder network, made up of representatives from 9 networks across the UK of members of the public who are committed to using their own experience to improve the lives of other local disabled people. I work with the government's Disability and Access ambassadors, who are senior business leaders across 12 different sectors, from advertising to universities, providing personal leadership to deliver good quality services for disabled people and to encourage improvements to accessibility. Hearing impairment has been a significant feature in the debate that we've had. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Derby North, on the event she hosted in the Attlee Suite. Was that yesterday? I think, yes, it was very recently anyway. It was a very good event. I made some rather poor efforts to address the group in British Sign Language myself, Sir Mark, as my first attempt to do so. But I know that she will be pleased, and I'm sure the Honourable Member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton will as well, to know that we are committed to supporting the British Sign Language Advisory Board, which was set up in the wake of Rosie Cooper's BSL Act of 2 or 3 years ago, which is the UK government's first dual language board, focusing on key issues impacting deaf people. We're committed to promoting and supporting British Sign Language. We will very shortly now be publishing the 2023-24 British Sign Language annual report. I'm very pleased to join my honourable friend, the member for Derby North, in congratulating the Royal School for the Deaf in Derby on the accolades it's received from Ofsted. And I very much agree with the important points made by my honourable friend, the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, about the importance of the support being provided to ensure that people's hearing is well looked after and supported. I need to work very closely, Sir Mark, with ministerial colleagues and with other departments right across government to make sure that disabled people get the support they need to overcome these daily barriers that they face. The commitment that I'm setting out today on behalf of the government needs to be a whole of government endeavour. So I was very pleased and grateful for what members said in the debate about my announcement last week of a lead minister for disability in every government department to represent the interests of disabled people and to champion disability inclusion and accessibility within their departments. I will be chairing regular meetings with that group. We'll encourage them to engage directly with disabled people and their representative organisations as they work on their departmental priorities. I'm looking forward to the first meeting of the group, which will take place next week. And I can give my honourable friend, the member for Thurrock, the assurance she was looking for about our shared aims and what we're going to be working towards in that group. I'll gladly give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful for giving way, and it's fantastic to hear about all the government doing around disability. He will know that many disabled people rely on family and friends to provide care and support to enable them to have the full life, to participate in work and school and other things that they enjoy. So will the Secretary of State reassure me and others that in taking forward this cross-departmental approach to disability, you'll also be considering the important role of family carers in that?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her point, and I can certainly give her the assurance that she seeks. As she knows, in the budget we made an important improvement to the arrangements of carers allowance, with the commitment that the earnings threshold for carers allowance will be increased to 16 hours per week at the national living wage rate. So that'll be a permanent link with the national living wage, which hopefully will overcome the problem that a lot of carers have run into over the last few years of them getting a bit of a pay rise and inadvertently being tipped above the threshold level and therefore inadvertently receiving an overpayment of carers allowance. So we hope that will help. We do know that that increase in itself will bring about 60,000 more family carers into eligibility for carers allowance. And we're also going to be looking, as the Chancellor said in the budget, at the possibility of a new taper arrangement for carers allowance to move away from the current cliff edge, which has always been there. That is going to be something that requires quite substantial IT development, and it's not going to be ready overnight, but I think my honourable friend will agree it's quite a promising idea about how we can improve support for unpaid carers in the future. So Mark, my focus is primarily on domestic disability policy, but I also oversee UK implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and I represent domestic disability-related policy on international platforms. And so in October, I attended the first ever G7 Disability Inclusion Summit, which was hosted by the Italian presidency and held just outside Assisi, where I and my G7 counterparts, and actually ministers from several other countries as well, and where we all signed up to the Solferino Charter. That sets out a collective agreement to advance work in 8 key areas, including, and I quote, inclusion as a priority issue in the political agenda of all countries. And I think it's a useful document focusing very specifically on disability inclusion all the way through. We've also been working to extend the UN Convention to a number of UK overseas territories. We recently extended the treaty to Bermuda, which is the first British overseas territory to which it has been extended. And I can confirm, Sir Mark, that we are committed to protecting and promoting disabled people's rights around the world, as well as in the UK. A great perk of my job was to attend the Paralympic Games in Paris in August. And the honourable member who speaks for the opposition was right to draw attention to the huge improvement and the way really that the London 2012 Paralympic Games took the Paralympics movement to a new level. So in August, I visited the athletes' village, and it was most interesting to see there how it had been laid out to be accessible to everybody using it. There were ramps everywhere, but also electrical devices at the bottom of every slope which you could clip onto your wheelchair to help you up the slope. And it's just worth making the point, Sir Mark, that in those games we came second in the medals table, ahead of the United States, ahead of all the other European countries, behind only China. Those games attracted unprecedented support and audiences with the venues full of enthusiastic and, I must say, highly partisan French audiences. But it was very good to hear everybody highlighting the importance of UK leadership, not just in having started the Games at Stoke Mandeville, but in having hosted the 2012 groundbreaking Games as well. And I must say, Sir Mark, the unique contribution of Channel 4 in 2012 and ever since has clearly been deeply appreciated around the world in the Paralympic movement. And my honourable friend, the member for West Bromwich, is absolutely right to draw attention to the importance of disabled people being able to be physically active. And there is a problem there in the benefit system as well, because of the fear that people too often have that if they are physically active, then that could lead to them losing their benefits. We need to address that challenge as well in reforming the system in our green paper when it's published in the spring. So, Sir Mark, Disability History Month does remind us that progress is a shared endeavour. Working together across government, across this chamber, with the wider community, we can build a society where everyone can participate fully and equally. The Honourable Member for Strangford rightly raised the question of the extent to which I'm working with ministers in Northern Ireland and indeed in Scotland and Wales as well. I have met with Minister Lyons in Northern Ireland, or he came to London, I met him here, and my honourable friend, the Minister for Transformation in our department, has also met him on his recent visit to Northern Ireland. And the honourable member for Strangford is right to underline the importance of us all working together across the United Kingdom on these priorities. So, Sir Mark, let's honour the courage and contributions of disabled people, past and present, by reaffirming our commitment not just to a month of reflection, but to a springboard, permanent springboard for lasting change and a more inclusive future.
Thank you. I now call on Jen Craft to wind up.
Thank you, Sir Mark, and thank you for the honourable members who have taken part in today's debate. I'd like to start with thanking the member for Battersea, who was instrumental in securing today's debate, and for her teams and her help in the preparation for my speech and for what went on here today. I'd just like to reflect on some of the issues that have been raised by members from across the House, and to say thank you for their contributions. To the member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, your words about how this is the first job where you felt that your disability was a bonus, I think rings true for a lot of us in this place. And I think there's certainly something that we should take away as disabled members about what it means to people outside to see us in this place and the message that we can send. The honourable member for New Forest East said when he lost his sight, he couldn't imagine being in this place. And I would say to anyone watching, you can. You know, we're here. We are very proud to be here, and you are welcome. And this house has a long way to go in potentially being fully accessible, but there are disabled MPs, and we are growing in number, and there are more of us than people know as well. I would like to thank the member for Derby North and the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket in raising the access issues that deaf people have with employment. One of the access needs of this House, I would say, potentially to British Sign Language first language speakers, is that there is. So that will mean something to people who see at home, and I will apologise rather than ask for permission for doing that afterwards, Sir Mark. I would thank the honourable member for West Bromwich to raise that wider issues to employment around transport access often form barriers to employment, and for also highlighting that disabled people do not need to be inspirational to deserve the rights and the access that everyone enjoys. And particularly I'd like to thank the words of the member for Strangford. I think he's moving reflections on his grandchild with additional needs. I think quite often it is when people come into close contact, indeed the Shadow Secretary of State mentioned this, with a disabled person, that they find their own attitudes adjusting and realising that there is something about the art of the possible. And I would say it's always a thing, I think, that we can all reflect on, whether we are indeed doing enough in ourselves to adjust our own attitudes toward disability and what is possible. And also to thank the member for Didcot and Wantage for raising the issue of discrimination in the workplace and what that looks like. My own experience of employment, I would say, has been mixed. And if you've ever experienced discrimination based on who you are in a workplace situation, it is quite a shocking thing to accomplish and takes a while to come back to that and to realise that actually the whole multifaceted thing that makes up you has an awful lot to offer. So I think there's something to reflect on there. And finally, thank you to the Minister for his thoughts. As I said at the start, it is incredibly encouraging to see a commitment to put disabled voices at the heart of decision making. And I think that is something that you should, I would hope that he will take away as the government develops its approach towards disabled people, not just in the issue of employment, but in across government and in every policy area that may have an impact on the lives of disabled people, which I would say is every policy area. But to make sure that that disabled voice is there right at the heart. And your reflection on your experience at the Paris Olympics, I think a lot of people who have been in a space that is specifically made for disabled people find themselves thinking, why can't everything be like this? You know, how much better would the world be if access was built right into the system? And the only way you get that is by including disabled people in the design process and in decision making right at the start. So to just conclude, I very much would like to be stood here next year in Disability History Month, reflecting on a year of progress, and not to be perhaps discussing some of the things that we have done today, but to look at how far we will have come over the previous 12 months. And I think that for a long while, if you are a disabled person, you are very good at adapting. You're very good at adapting the way you act and bending to sort of society's norms. And I would just throw a challenge out there that maybe it's about time society bent to us a little bit as well. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered Disability History Month. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The sitting is suspended until 3 p.m, which is very shortly. Order, order.